Hey,
Hey Ben, how you doing?
good. How are you?
Doing good. God bless you.
God bless you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and good evening, and welcome to Bible study. Uh, we're continuing our journey through the Old Testament. We're actually continuing our journey through Isaiah. um, if you were with us last time, you guys probably remember that we weren't really able to get through all of Isaiah, even as an overview. There's a lot. It's a long book alone, and there's a lot to unpack. So we decided to instead of rushing through the rest of it, we decided we'll just do another episode for it.
Yeah, so here we are, right?
Yeah, and here we are. So, Pastor Ezekiel, thank you for coming out again. You were originally going to teach today, but uh, you come out to finish Isaiah, which I'm sure everyone really appreciates. I know I
Yeah,
do.
yeah. My pleasure, my honor. I can guarantee we will finish Isaiah today. So Isaiah won't take a part three, but yeah, we'll get to finish it, and I'm really excited for us to close, and then that'll prepare us to move forward.
Yeah. Um, I, I've already seen a lot of people already in the comments. Jesse shared some Bible verses from Isaiah.
Oh,
Um,
cool, cool,
yeah.
cool.
Uh, I would, if you guys, for all of our studies, if there's like a passage that you find particular interesting, or you just know you have upfront questions about, you can
Sure.
feel free to share them like right up front. And it's great because we're gonna hit certain verses, and we're gonna not hit others, and it's great to see what stands out to some people versus others. It's easy for anyone with a different perspective to really see something in a verse to um, be spoken to by a verse that or a passage that wouldn't have otherwise come up. So it's great to get more exposure for the content of any particular book. So yeah. Um, are you ready to get going or?
Yeah, yeah, I'm ready. Also, too, just if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments.
Yes.
Um, uh, this part will be shorter than the last, but that should open us up for more discussion time. So, if um, if you guys have any questions,
Mhm.
just put them in there, and Ben will be on the lookout for them,
Yeah.
and we'll do our best to give a response. And yeah, we're excited for. I'm still excited about this journey we're on. It was really exciting for me to personally dive into Isaiah, and as Ben noted, we're highlighting certain verses, and sometimes that feels like the expense of others. But we would love to. You can share any verses that really stuck out to you, and yeah, we appreciate the conversation and the exchange back and forth. So, and also too, Ben, thank you to you as well for hosting and allowing us to make room for us to finish Isaiah off without it being rushed. So,
Of
thank
course.
you.
Yeah. I can spend a while in these books personally. So, uh, all right. Well, yeah, like you said, if you guys have questions, this is definitely a great. We always want the questions, but this is absolutely a great Bible study to have questions in, even if it's from the first half of Isaiah.
Sure.
Um, So if you have any of those, please let us know as we go through the rest of Isaiah here. Um, I say we just kick it off with some prayer and we
Sounds
get
great.
going. Heavenly Father, we give you glory and honor, and we thank you for your word. We thank you for revealing yourself to us. We thank you for revealing yourself to your servant Isaiah all those years ago for us. We thank you that these texts were preserved for us, that your wisdom and your intelligence was given to those to understand it, to preserve it, to decipher it, and to translate it for us. We ask that that same spirit will be given to each and every one of us as we seek to find your heart in it, to know you better through it, and that it will be edifying to our minds and to our spirits and to our relationship with you. We ask
Yes.
these things in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Ben, for praying. And once again, everyone, thank you for being here. Um, we're getting ready to jump back. We're going to jump right into it. So, if just some encouragement, if you wanted to share your stream or share a link, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, go ahead and do that. And hopefully, we'll get some people to join us who maybe just forgot or weren't planning to, but they gotta. It's here in Kissimmee, at least it's raining. Maybe you're stuck home, and a Bible study would be perfect way to spend the rainy evening night here. So, all right. So this is Isaiah part two, um, and what I'm going to try to do is just help us transition with where we're at. I cannot, for time's sake, go over uh, much of the details that we looked at. But we have that available online for you to go back and watch. So that is the benefit, that when we do this live, they actually get saved. And we have on our YouTube channel, uh, we have a created playlist that you can look into, the church's playlist, and look our Old Testament, our journey through the Old Testament, and all of our videos are in there. So I invite you, if you are joining us tonight and you missed part one, just go back whenever it's convenient for you, so that then you could just get this total package, because Isaiah has a lot, and again, that has to do with the length of his book as a major prophet. So just we'll start out with showing that timeline again. I just want to bring everyone into where we're at once again. So this is just part of an introduction. We looked at this last week, Ben. If you're able just to pull up the prophet's timeline for us. So as we noted last week, Isaiah is is was the last prophet. Um, we can say one of the last voices, um, a person who God used to speak of the things to come to Israel, because of their their lack in responding to an opportunity to repent. And so, if you see again on that timeline, you can see those lines drawn through the other prophets. Those just represent the prophets that we've gone through. And so you can see Isaiah is the last prophet right there before the Assyrian invasion. And so, what we did cover last week was that Assyrian invasion did take place. We read about it. You can read about it in 2 Kings 17. We have the story recounted from Isaiah's words here, and we went through that. And then, in what we also saw was Isaiah was also able to see and speak of the Babylonian invasion as well. Um, and so Isaiah is able to see that. And so one of the things that has made Isaiah very unique is how far out he sees, but also what we established last week was that Isaiah, more than any Old Testament prophet, speaks towards the Messiah. And that's what really stands out with Isaiah. So again, that's just recapping from last week. We talked more about that. So that's available for you if you go back and watch part one. Now, I just want to show the sections of the book, the structure of the book as well. Ben, if you're able to put that up. And so last time that we discussed, we actually got through the first three sections, and then we started section 4. And those first three sections, one of the things that's important to see with the book of Isaiah is that Isaiah itself, the book, it divides itself in two big halves. And so sections 1 through 3 fall into that first half, known as the former things. And then sections 4 through 6, which are chapters 40 to the end, 66, represent the latter things. And so what does that mean? What are the former things? What are the latter things? Well, the former things represent the nation as she was. And so those sections cover basically her broken covenant, her infidelity, her adulterous ways, and as a result, her judgments and the things that are going to come for not responding to the voice of Yahweh through the prophets. So that first section is kind of like, I don't know, a big woe. There's this big woe that is coming, but there's this big turn of the page that we know as the latter things, because then the book is then filled with beautiful prophetic hope. So that's kind of where that's where we kind of left off, and that's where we're going to pick up. So on the big picture, we're in the second half of Isaiah, the latter things. This is where we see a lot of prophetic hope, and yeah, we're going to go from there. So we did start out with that section 4, which is I titled it Yahweh's Comfort and His War Against the Idol. And if you were here last week, chapter 40 begins that second half of the book. And just to remind you of what is Isaiah's big role, if we could kind of say, what is Isaiah's message as a prophet? I came up with that Isaiah's responsibility is to announce this coming purification process that will serve for a greater redeeming purpose. And so we spent some time in that as we looked at verses. But what Isaiah saw was this purification that needed to come, and it was to burn away, let's say, the nation's impurities. And so then that can reveal what is truly beautiful about her as Yahweh's chosen people. And so that would be kind of like a general way to say, in a concise way, what is Isaiah doing? Isaiah is responsible to announce the purifying process that will serve for a greater redeeming purpose for the people. And so where we left off was we introduced a key theme of the servant of the Lord, which was actually our seventh key theme. Ben, are you able to put up the first key themes that we looked? There we go. You're ahead of the game. So now these are the key themes from part 1. And so they were the New Jerusalem, the branch of the Lord, the holy seed and stump, the child Emmanuel, the bright morning star, the way prepared, and the servant of the Lord. So I invite you to go back. I watched the Bible study like 3 times already. I think it's helpful for this journey, and our goal and our aim, what we're trying to do is highlight themes, not just of single books, but themes that will play out later on. And so, just looking at these, they get highlighted in Isaiah, but they play out later on in the rest of our scripture reading. They play out, many of these themes play out into the New Testament and get really unpacked and or clarified, or you could say the fulfillment of some of these key themes. So again, our heart with doing this as a whole was to kind of help us in our journey through the Old Testament, so that can serve to bring greater meaning as we look into our New Testament. So thank you, Ben, for showing that. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick up the servant of the Lord a little bit. Again, we touched it at the end. So what we'll do is we'll just go back and explore that theme and then go forward. So Isaiah was seeing a lot of things, right? Isaiah goes really, I've been using this word 2.0, where Isaiah starts to see things that the people themselves are waiting for a king that will sit in Jerusalem from the line of David. And so that's the picture of this messianic king that will come. And so what Isaiah starts to see is he starts to see in these oracles that we have recorded, he starts to see a sign of a child that's going to be born, and his name is going to be Emmanuel. And so he's the sign means God is with us. But in Isaiah, Isaiah sees this branch, and then he saw then he gave words that the nation will be cut down, but there'll be a stump, and they'll get cut down to a holy seed. Uh,
Mhm.
and so Isaiah's seen all these things that are pointing towards hope. And where we left off was that now Isaiah saw this servant. He sees this servant who's coming, who's chosen by the Lord. And the reason why that would be significant is because um, before Isaiah sees this future servant coming, Israel, the people understood that they were chosen by God, absolutely. When they enter into covenant with the Lord in Exodus chapter 19, they know that they're chosen. They know that they're called holy, that they're peculiar, that they're a treasure before the Lord. And so, what's always important to understand when we're reading our Bibles and we're passing through, some of these details is the big picture is really important.
Mhm.
Israel was chosen by God. He put he set his love on them, his affection on them. But the purpose of him doing that was also to reach all of creation, to reach the rest of the nations. And so God did not choose Israel and exclude the rest, but as a matter of fact, he chose Israel to reach the rest. And so that's a big part
Yeah.
of the text that when we're reading is always good to have. I have that thing like iron in the back of my head.
And it's not just something that becomes apparent over time. It's something that God says to Abraham
Yeah,
in
Genesis.
Genesis.
Yeah, Genesis chapter 12.
Yeah,
Um,
in the
is-
original promise to Abraham, it's already there to be a blessing to the nations.
yeah, and the Lord even tells Abraham that the time is going to come where yes, I'm going to bless you and multiply you, but a time was going to come where his people and his children and his seed would be enslaved and be in a land that's not their own, but that he would come and he would deliver them. And ultimately, this deliverance and this freedom would also make room for them to ultimately fulfill a great purpose to be a light to the rest of the nations. And so, as we are in these prophets, Israel has failed at that, and this is why the prophets, you hear them. A lot of times we feel like you can feel like you're reading the same stuff over and over again. What we have tried to highlight is that each prophet does that in a unique way, so that makes it fresh. But what we do see is the temperature turned up as we get closer to these prophetic timelines of God's judgment again for their lack of response. And so we saw that. But now here we are. Isaiah has saw this servant who comes on the scene, and I picture just someone coming into the room. um, this is a servant, and there's kind of like a question mark over him. So Isaiah, through what he sees, is going to kind of give definition to that. So
Right.
let's just read Isaiah 40. Oh, go ahead, Ben, before we read.
I
Go
was
ahead.
gonna say he's gonna start filling in that character as well.
Yeah, he's going to start filling in that character. So we're going to read Isaiah 42, verse 1. This section actually begins, or this second half began with Isaiah 40, with the famous or well known to some, comfort, comfort, where
Mm.
uh, comfort, comfort for my people says your God, just beautiful, beautiful. Where, and then it's, have comfort. You have, um, your sins have been paid for. Time of service, the time of your judgment has been completed. So again, what's important to note is when we're in the second half, I, I, Isaiah now is speaking as if he's been transported into the future,
Mhm.
because Isaiah lived 100 years before the Babylonian takeover and exile. So he lives his life and he dies, and so he's got a lot of prophetic words and oracles said that he does not live to see. And so when we get to the second half, Isaiah speaking, look, Isaiah speaking as if he's lived on the other side, if he's lived on this return, he says some things that it makes it like it almost seems like you had to be there. He so um, we guess in some sense, Isaiah's prophecies do, or his prophetic words do, speak of future things to come. Now we've talked about this, that not every prophet is a future fortune telling kind of thing.
Mhm.
Isaiah sees a lot of things that are ahead,
Mhm.
and so now we got this, this word of hope, of comfort. It's like if Isaiah's on the other side, looking back to people who will go into exile, but now he's speaking like he's returned from it or he saw it, and all these latter things that the Lord is going to do or Yahweh is going to do, and they're hopeful. But how does that happen? How does that look? What needs to actually take place for for future, for the redeeming purpose? And so now, go ahead, Ben. Read 42, verse 1.
Here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will bring justice to the nations.
And so here, this God is choosing a servant. And what's interesting, as I said, Israel was the chosen servant. They were supposed to be the kingdom of priests, and the priest's job is to be mediation, to bring reconciliation between Yahweh and His covenant people. But Israel has failed as a nation, and so now here comes the Lord. He's inviting a servant, and he's saying this servant is his chosen one. He takes delight in him, so he's pleased with him. And then he says, I will put my spirit on him.
Mm.
Um, and now, if you rewind and go to the first part of this, uh, the spirit would be on this child that he saw as well. And so now here's something that is in common with the servant. The spirit's going to be on him, and then he says, and he will bring justice to the nation. Is it nation or nations? Let me see here. To the
Nation.
nations,
Yeah.
yeah. And so usually when we read words like that, the nations, this general, like this plural nations, oftentimes that is talking not about Israel particularly. It's not talking about Israel as a nation, but it's usually implied to Gentile nations. And so now this servant um, is chosen and is going to bring justice to the nations. But this would also include Israel, you could say. It's not gonna. It doesn't
It
mean so.
it
Yeah,
is interesting that because when I think of bringing justice to something, it's right. It's an acknowledgement that the nations are in need of justice, which is almost in this to point out that the nations are sort of as much a victim of Israel as Israel is a victim of the nations at
yes,
this point. They've been just fighting with one another and killing each other for a while. And so there's like this need for the nations need justice. Like we've spent a lot of the story like, oh, Israel needs justice. They need to be brought out of Egypt, for example.
yeah,
But at this point, Israel's been fighting and warring with other nations so long. The nations kind of need justice, from all of that. So it's showing that well, justice itself is like a blessing, but it's showing that sort of like brokenness in the relationship between Israel and the nations that it's supposed to be a blessing to.
yeah, absolutely right. And this is the reason. Again, going back to Abraham, it's to choose Israel to get to these nations,
Mm-hmm.
right? That Israel be is acts as a light, and then can bring these other nations that are suffering um, into peace with God as well. But right now, Israel is in. We've read in, like, Israel got in. They didn't just. They're almost in worse shape than the nations
Mm-hmm.
are who are hurting. So what happens with God's plan? What happened with God's purpose? This is the beauty of what our scriptures are trying to tell us. That they don't come to an end. God raises up this servant, and here now, look, this servant. will be the one to get to the nations. So in this sense, who Israel failed to be as a nation, this servant will be, and this servant will also be able to look, reach Israel and reach the nations. So,
Mm,
so this servant becomes the saving of Yahweh's initial intent, and that's to bring people into justice and people to bring into um, beautiful covenant relationship with Yahweh. And this is all coming from the Lord. And so in chapter 43, which was the actually let's go to in that same chapter, verse 42. If you could read verses 6 through 9, Ben.
sure. I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness. I will take hold of your hand. I will keep you and will make you to be a covenant for the people and a light for the Gentiles, to open the eyes that are blind, to free captives from prison, and to release from the dungeon those who sit in darkness. I am the Lord, that is my name. I will not yield my glory to another or my praise to idols. See, the former things have taken place, and new things I declare. Before they spring into being, I announce them to you.
So here's just beautiful text. We're in the same chapter, and verse 6 is talking about how the Lord is saying, I called you in righteousness. Now, who he's speaking to, who he's speaking of? Well, he's still speaking of this this new servant. And so look, from verse 1, we have a servant who is the chosen one, who God is pleased with, takes delight in, who he's put his spirit on him. He's going to bring justice to the nations. He's
Mm,
called now in righteousness. And look, he says, I will keep you and will make you, this is verse 6 that Ben just read, to be a covenant for my people. Look, and a light for the Gentiles. So clearly here, the servant is going to be the light to the Gentiles, but is the servant himself will be the hinge that keeps the covenant between the Lord and the nations. And then we get this descriptive where now the blind, their eyes are being opened. Those that are in prison and are captive in dungeons, they're being freed from these places and released. Those that are in darkness, and you're like, whoa, and I, right? It's like, whoa, like when I remember reading this, I'm like, wow, praise be to the servant, right? Praise be to this righteous servant. Thank God the servant said yes. Thank God the servant is going to show up for the job. And then in verse 8, it says, I am the Lord. That is my name. And I will not yield my glory to another or my praise to idols. And it's almost like, oh, if well, I was just getting ready to praise and worship and bow down to the servant. And then now the Yahweh says, I am the Lord, and I'm not going to share my glory with another. And then now there's this little bit of tension. At least I see it in the text. It's like, look at this? Do we praise the servant or do we only yield glory to Yahweh? Are those two things possible?
mm,
And so, in our minds, if the servant is someone other than Yahweh, then it's like, okay, yeah, I mean, give the servant a thumbs up, but then don't give any praise to him because only Yahweh receives the glory. Or is there something unique with the servant's relationship to Yahweh? And so I just want to place that out there, right? Did you see that, Ben? Like
yeah, like
here comes the servant. He's able to do all these things. So I'm like, praise be to the servant. And then now it's like, the Lord is my name. Don't give glory to no other.
yeah, it brings because I when I read it, I'm like, what is verse 8 doing here?
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah,
know,
it just stops everything dead in its tracks.
yeah, the first time you're going through it, it's like it feels it's like sudden. Like why is this being brought up? But what you're saying, it brings into focus that like so like how interesting it is that in verses 6 and 7, he seems to be giving glory to this servant and then stops to say, but I won't give my glory to someone else.
Yep.
Other, right, to another. I won't yield my glory to another. So it's almost, it does bring you to this sort of screeching halt. And if you're paying attention, it makes you go, oh, there's something interesting going on here. And, you
Like
know,
what could this relation what is the relationship between the servant and Yahweh? And I think we're meant to kind of come to this halt and just be ready to think about it. Um, and so, yeah. And then verse 9 says, see, the former things have taken place. And remember, there's a former things of Isaiah. That's the past, there's the judgments, there's the exiles. There's Israel was the servant, but look, and new things I declare. And before they spring into being, I announce them to you. Whoa, look at that. So here, the Yahweh, the Lord, is is um, is letting them know that something a page has been turned. See the former things, they've taken place, new things I declare. So Yahweh is wanting them to know that they're I don't know what word to use. Like the page has turned is one of them. A shift has happened, but it is described as a new thing, and he
yeah,
yeah
there's a new, um, I mean, new things really seems like the best way to put it. It's like
yeah
a big shift in how that's on its way.
yeah
That's coming.
and it's this introduction to the servant that is seems to be commencing this. So this servant that is now brought into picture is is significant towards going from former to latter, and the Lord is announcing it. So we can say that the former things are judgments, are exiles, that that Israel as a nation was the servant. That's kind of now former. The new things will be a return, but also the righteous servant who keeps covenant. That's what's former too, that Israel as a people are out of covenant, broken covenant. A new thing can be seen that this righteous servant is he's going to be faithful. He will keep covenant, and he will be a light, because what's former is that they're in darkness, and the nations still are in the shadow of that darkness. Um,
Yeah, it raises so many questions. I mean, all of this, it raises these questions, and you're like, who's this figure? What is their relationship to Yahweh?
yes. Yep.
Um, and what does it mean for a person to be a covenant?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What is
Yeah.
that? That's our, like, that's breaking some categories, at least to me, and based on my understanding of what a covenant meant to people. Like, what does it mean for a person to be a
Yeah.
covenant? I think there's definitely, it's these constants of there's something going on, there's something like new happening right here,
Yeah.
that's breaking
And
categories, that's breaking expectations, that's confusing. you know
yeah. And for us, right, we're standing at a different place. We're standing further ahead.
yeah,
So for us as readers, we're like, oh, I know who that is. You know what I'm saying? And
yeah,
and it's beautiful here. I'll just put up a comment, Pastor Tanya. Jesus is God. There we go. Simple and easy. We got it, man. We got it.
got it.
But for the listeners of Isaiah's words, they're supposed to be seeing this mysterious.
Yeah.
And so I love what you just pointed out, Ben, is that what is latter is how did Israel keep covenant? Or how were they supposed to? There's a question. How was Israel supposed to keep covenant? By obeying Torah, right? Obeying the instruction. So we keep covenant by obeying Torah. That is the thing that helps us the law establishes the covenant,
Mhm.
keeping it. But now a person is going to be the thing that establishes and keeps the covenant. So that is certainly a latter thing.
Mhm.
Torah, right? Once was the thing that held and established covenant and peace with Yahweh. Now it's this servant, this person who
Yeah.
will be the covenant for the
It's a
people.
new thing. You
Beautiful.
can start to
It's a
see.
new
Yeah,
thing
it's a
here.
new thing. You can start to see as you start digging into it and letting yourself try to put yourself in the mind space of
Yeah,
someone who hasn't had the New Testament and hasn't grown up in that tradition of like of why this is all new, groundbreaking, very confusing statements.
yeah.
There's
There's
definitely
actually
that feeling of, oh, there's something, this is different.
yeah,
This is different.
yeah. And there's a person who's gonna come in the New Testament who's gonna have a meal with some people, break bread and drink some wine, and he's gonna say, "This is the new covenant."
New covenant, yeah.
So
Which
awesome.
helps us, right? So we
Yeah.
say, "Oh, Jesus is God. We got it. We figured it out."
Yeah.
But that's because he explained it to us.
Yeah. And so could you imagine, right? Being at that table as a disciple who does know Isaiah and and hopefully was introduced to this servant who was coming, who will be the covenant keeper.
Mm,
And and then Jesus says these words. Yeah, profound.
yeah.
Alrighty. So uh but okay, so that verse there, I do want to look at the end of verse 8. Can you read just the end of verse 8? Or you could read verse 8.
Yeah.
That was 42.
Um, I am the Lord, that is my name. I will not yield my glory to another or praise to idols.
Yeah. So right, this the righteous servant is going to be the one that keeps covenant, but this does not mean that the people or those who come, um, Yahweh is still bringing up that He's not going to share His glory, His space, look, the weight in their lives with idols.
Hmm.
So it's not that, hey guys, servant came, you keep toying around with your idols. You do see um, the Lord bring up these idols, and actually this section here, these chapters 40 through 48, these idols come up several times, and he while there's this is the latter, right, this is the latter times, these are the new things. um, we're getting introduced to this servant, and what this is a powerful being coming into the picture, what he's going to do, justice, righteousness, covenant keeping for the people, light to the nations, all this great stuff. But still, Yahweh wants to warn them against the idol. And so there is this war that they're going to have to face, or each generation, each human being will have this personal wrestling, or and have to make personal decisions to put the idols down, and give Yahweh their place, give Yahweh His place in their lives, and that's going to be for every generation. So when you're reading Isaiah in those chapters between 40 and 48, you'll see the idol come up, and he'll talk about humans carving the thing and having to do this and mold it and shape it, and it's like in the end it's like giving glory or praise or putting your allegiance to this idol that's been fashioned by a human hand. It's for them to see it as folly. Like
Yeah.
it's like you're worshiping these graven images and these statues, and they're powerless to save. They're powerless to hear. They don't respond. And so on that level, as an actual image, or like a physical thing, there's no power to them, and yet you're giving your allegiance to them. Um, and this little thing is what you're betraying Yahweh for. And so
Yeah.
you'll see in Isaiah him speak against it.
I think it's so useful to to remember the connection between the word glory and weight, the
Wait,
concept of
absolutely.
weight, which, as far as I understand it, is essentially just what the Hebrew word meant.
Yeah.
And it's not even that it's kind of beautiful because even in English we have this concept, something having weight, in our lives. That means something. We understand what that means.
Yeah.
That sort of metaphor, if you will, and you think about like the weight of God,
Mm.
right? And I think that I've heard lots of people talk about this idea of like we may not traditionally have the idea of like a God in our lives as much like in the secular world. They're not necessarily out there worshiping the God of the sun or something like that. But God is almost also this role that something plays. It's the thing that you place a certain weight on,
Yeah.
and we do, and everyone has that somewhere in their life. And the problem is with that much weight, the weight of God, the weight that only Yahweh Himself can hold, it crumbles. Anything else is gonna crumble under that amount of glory,
Oh yeah.
and it's gonna let us down.
Hmm.
And we put our hopes, we put that weight on things that can't take that weight, that
That's
aren't
right.
built to take that weight.
Yeah.
So and so it's really useful and it's really beautiful to me when I see glory. I just think about that concept of weight. It feels
Yeah.
really intuitive to me.
Yeah. I think it's been this past year whenever I mention it, even from the pulpit when I'm speaking, and I'll say the glory. I follow that up with weight.
Yeah.
It's the Hebrew word kavod, which also is where we get the word honor. Where
Mm,
our English words are rendering to honor something, it's really to give that thing weight. And
yeah.
so if we say we honor with our mouths and our lips, yet we're actually not giving weight to, let's say, if I say I come to honor you, Lord, and I just do that with my lips. However, my heart is not really leaning on Him, or I'm not taking His words and allowing them to have weight and impact on my life and in my mind and my heart.
Mhm.
Then that would be uh, where the prophet said, "They honor me with their lips. They give weight with their lips, kavod with their lips, but their hearts are what? Far from me."
Mhm.
So, yeah, I just thought it was important to highlight that, the
Yeah.
item. Um, and now let's read Isaiah 43, verses 14 to 19. And I want, before Ben gets to it, let me see if this is it. Yes, when he gets to verse 19, it's going to be familiar with you. And I actually added, because we're reading from the New International Version, I added the King James Version part to 19 because we're familiar with hearing it that way. So
Mm.
just in case if it sounded different with the NIV, I want to bring the words back to the KJV. Uh, and just here's going to be a verse that is very familiar to many of us or many Christians. And here we're just putting it in its context. So go ahead, Ben.
Right. This is what the Lord says, your Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel. For your sake, I will send to Babylon and bring down as fugitives all the Babylonians in the ships in which they took pride. I am the Lord, your Holy One, Israel's Creator, your King. This is what the Lord says, He who made a way through the sea, a path through the mighty waters, who drew out the chariots and horses, the army and reinforcements together, and they lay there, never to rise again, extinguished, snuffed out like a wick. Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland, or as the KJV puts it, a road in the wilderness and rivers in the desert.
Yeah. If you can comment, and if you heard Isaiah 43 verse 19, where God's doing this new thing, do you not hear it? Do you not perceive it? And how He's going to make a road in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. And so here, uh, Isaiah 43, Isaiah speaking on behalf of Yahweh, um, the Holy One of Israel, he says, "For your sake, I'm going to send to Babylon and bring down as fugitives, all the Babylonians and the ships in which they took pride. And so here's kind of, we read about in Isaiah 14, where there's the prophecy that Babylon, this great, powerful empire, also decorated uh, with beauty. This like it was also this beautiful empire, and the kings of Babylon, they displayed their power through their beauty. And so there's this sense where the scriptures are communicating that they were also filled with pride with that as well. So, but here Isaiah is again speaking on Yahweh's behalf, where it's already been said that Babylon would fall and judgment would come. Here in these chapters now, bringing that up, that for their sake the Lord is going to do this, and then he's going to declare himself that he's their creator and he's their king. Now we were introduced to that Israel was supposed to be this theocracy, right? Where their king, it wasn't about having a human king.
Mhm.
It was about Yahweh being their king and his words, his instructions, that that leading them as a people. And so they're mediators, which was the priesthood, but Yahweh was the king. And so, we read in when we were back in Samuel how they had rejected him as their king, and that happened by default when they requested a human king. And this is where we get Saul as the first king of Israel. And so here, as he's speaking about the deliverance that will come on the other side of exile, or bringing down the stronghold of Babylon, right? Because they're going to get carried off by this great and powerful nation. Here he's speaking of their downfall. He wants to, after that, wonderful, great, awesome, let's all praise Yahweh. He's going to bring down the guy oppressing us, or the guy who's has their shoe on our necks. Yahweh wants to remind them, well, it's that I'm your king. So this is not just about like just saving you for saving you sake. It's saving you, and I'm your creator. I am the Lord. I am the Holy One. I'm your king. So
Mhm.
um, it's not just to see Yahweh's power as just a way out from things that would have made them uncomfortable, but ultimately to bring their hearts back to Yahweh. Um, And then he reminds them in verse 16 about how he made the way through the sea and this path through the mighty waters. That's for them to think of the Exodus account, right? This is reminding them of the Exodus account and how he did that. And then how, right, the Egyptians and Pharaoh's army, how what happened, right, the waters closed up on them. And then he uses this thing and he extinguished them like a candle's wick, like you blow out a candle, like
Yeah.
like 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 it's like how fast a candle goes out. I mean, you don't often half the time you don't even need to blow it out. Some some breeze, someone walks by and the candle goes out, but he snuffed it out like a wick. Like it was implying like this was no hard task for the Lord Yahweh. He did this mighty deliverance, but then he says this, but forget it. Like forget the former things. And here this language comes up. Don't dwell on the past. And then he again speaks of these new things. And again, this is what he's trying to do. He's trying to announce uh, this latter time and a new way of how he's going to do it. Well, in one sense, who brought the children out of Israel? The prophet Moses. But Moses is not. He himself is not coming back. But we did read in the Old Testament that there would be a time where there would be a prophet like Moses who would come. And so if we were good readers back then, or if Israel was a good reader back then, there would be someone, but greater than Moses, someone who would come like him. And Moses brought them through the sea, but now Yahweh is saying, forget that, something new is coming. And this is kind of like a interesting picture. They go through, and with Moses and in the Exodus, the water dries up, and that's their deliverance. Here, he says, I'm doing a new thing, and his description is not water drying up, but water appearing. I'm
Mm,
making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. And so
mm,
there's just this, it's this picture that looks totally different. Deliverance before was licking up the sea, drying it up. This new thing that the Lord is doing is bringing streams, bringing rivers in the desert. And I think that's just a descriptive way to show uh, or to create the difference of these new things coming. And that's a good way
yeah.
to see that.
Yeah, and it's like, well, it's really powerful because it takes the time to remind us of the amazing rescue out of Egypt, for him to essentially be like, yeah, but the rescue that's coming, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Yeah.
And like you said, um, this imagery of making a way in the wilderness, making streams in the wasteland. It's like, I'm making a way where you thought there was no way,
Mm.
where you thought there's no way for 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 this to work. There's no way for this to be resolved. There's no way to fix this, to be rescued from this. I'm making a way in that wasteland, and I'm making a way in that wilderness, and I'm making streams in that wasteland, and that's really uh, uh, beautiful and powerful to me. To that this like acknowledgement of like what's coming is a rescue from something that you thought you couldn't be rescued from. What's
Absolutely.
coming is a redemption from something that you thought you couldn't be redeemed from. Like it's the making possible what by all means should have been impossible.
Yeah. And and Isaiah is saying this to a people who are who will be carried into exile, and
Hmm.
it's going to get really devastating for them.
Yeah.
Their worst nightmares are going to come upon them. Granted, it is their choice in that they have refused the gift of repentance, and so therefore this is the sentence for it. So they brought it upon themselves, but it's this is true of all of us, right? Um, we do this to ourselves, and it's in that place where we realize, right, our fault. It's in that moment where we realize our folly. It's in that moment where we clearly see our disobedience, but it often results in us experiencing very scary times that do feel uh, hopeless. And so these words of Isaiah that he's not making up, that Yahweh is giving, is in hopes that when they get to that place, you know, the the bottom, the lowest of lows, that they do have the Lord's word with them, that He'll make this stream in that desert. And so,
It can seem really hopeless otherwise.
yeah,
Without these words of hope, it can be like
oh yeah,
that like if you think about the story of Israel in a way starting in Egypt, it's like they're about to go back, right?
hmm
It's not Egypt, but they're about to go back into slavery. They're about
yes,
to, and this time it's because of the consequences of their own actions. And so it's like, so you're left with this. Well, how could this work if it wasn't to be brought out of your slavery by God Himself and given instruction on how to live well and in union with Him, and they were able to follow that, even though they were shown that they weren't. You could be left with like, there's no way that this is gonna
and
work. It's just humans are hopeless.
yeah, and some of us have been in sentiments of that
Right.
sort, where it's like we realize the failure a little too late, and then when we get there, we're like, wow, I could have avoided this. I could have obeyed the Lord. And you then sit there and you're like, well, I just accept this I also just accept because I brought it upon myself. Some of us can also sit in that hopelessness. Well, this is just what it is, and I do deserve this, and I made this bed, and I'm just gonna lie in it.
Mm.
And so the story that we're seeing here with Yahweh and Israel is that He loves Israel so much that He's not gonna let her lie in it,
Yeah.
and
But
that's
like,
powerful, right? Because it's undeserved.
mhm.
Go ahead,
It's
Ben.
yeah, and they're also in that place that I think that we find ourselves in too, where we can get to that point and we're just like, this isn't going to work unless I somehow miraculously change because I'm like because I fail to follow, and then I see that and I lie in it, and then I try again and I fail again. Like and it's like I have something about me has to change. Like something about my heart has to change. It's not just, and I think that comes up in these prophets a few times too, of like of the heart. There has to be a hope that their heart can change. There's just something fundamental
Sure.
like that can change.
Yeah. So, um, and so they're gonna get to that lowest of lows. They're gonna be sitting in exile, with Babylon ruling over them. And so that's it. If Babylon's got you, there's nothing else. Like, what are you gonna do? Like when that happens, it's because the Babylonians have come in. Uh, Little by little, they exercise their power until there's the final carrying away of exile in 586 BC, which is how Kings end. Second Kings 25, which Ben taught. And so it kind of, once you get there, you could really be like, okay, well, that's it. What happens from here? Well, like, so we got this prophetic word of hope. Like, okay, cool. But then Isaiah sees something. Like it's like he continues to see, or God, and he's not doing it himself. I don't, I don't believe Isaiah's not making this stuff up, but God is allowing him to see. And now,
Mm.
in Isaiah 45, um, verses 1 to 4, Ben, if you can pull that up, I'm going to say Isaiah goes 3.0 here. This is
This
what he sees. Just read it, Ben. Now remember, the Babylonian, that 586. I mean, Isaiah's prophesying long before that, and then what Isaiah's about to see is going to be, he's going to see an end of exile, and he's going to see something very specifically. Go ahead.
This is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I take hold of, to subdue nations before him, and to strip kings of their armor, to open doors before him so that gates will not be shut. I will go before you, and I will level the mountains. I will break down gates of bronze and cut through bars of iron. I will give you hidden treasures, riches stored in secret places, so that you may know that I am the Lord, the God of Israel, who summons you by name. For the sake of Jacob my servant, of Israel my chosen, I summon you by the name and bestow you a title of honor, though you did not acknowledge me.
Now, I could imagine if just hearing Isaiah's words, I would, who's Cyrus?
Who's Cyrus? And what it's this sounds like a
Who?
weird name, probably too, because it's like the name. I don't know what form this takes in
Sure.
Hebrew,
Yeah,
but
and I didn't look into that either. But
but but if it sounds not Babylonian and it doesn't sound Hebrew, that name, right?
mhm. And so what we know, okay, well, what is it saying here? Now the Lord has another anointed one, and this is, that word anointed is where we get the word Mashiach from.
Hmm.
And so there, the Lord is saying to his anointed, to Cyrus. Now this guy Cyrus is an anointed one, is a Mashiach of some kind of way.
Mhm.
and who's going to be used also as a serpent, not a serpent, as a servant.
Different
And
characters are used as
yes,
serpents.
but what he's saying here is that he's going to use someone named Cyrus, who he's anointing for this task, he's being set apart for a task, and that his the whose right hand I will take hold of to subdue nations. So basically saying he's going to raise him up, uh, his authority above the others, and he's going to use him to subdue nations and to strip kings of basically of their might and their power. Look, to open doors before him so that the gates will not be shut.
Mhm.
And then the last verse there, it says, for the sake of Jacob my servant, Israel my chosen, I will summon you by name and bestow on you a title of honor, though you do not acknowledge me. And so now, if you're living in this time, you're introduced to someone named Cyrus, who the Lord has is is saying that he's anointed to bring down other nations. And so at the least, there someone hopefully made a note, scribbled a note on a somewhere, I don't know, on a stone or something like. But
Well, someone wrote it down on the scroll, right?
yeah, someone got it down on the scroll. And what we are going to come to see is that Cyrus, and not to jump ahead too much, but Cyrus is going to come later on. Look where Isaiah is at. Look at the Syrian invasion, 720. 586 is the Babylonian invasion. They're carried in. They're in exile. We're going to learn that's going to be about a 70-year period, and then we're going to see this guy Cyrus come onto the scene, and we're going to see how the Lord actually uses him to be the instrument that will basically allow for the exiles who are in Babylon to come. And so what we'll read later on in books is we're going to see how Cyrus comes into play. I'm not going to go into that, but at least now you know he is going to come into play. And so just knowing that, it's like, how did Isaiah see him? Well, it would be the, the Lord giving Isaiah to be able to see that. Whether Isaiah understood that in full, if whether Isaiah clearly knew who Cyrus was going to be or where he was going to come from, just the fact that he was able to see him and name him is whoa.
Yeah, all the stuff that we get from Isaiah, his visions, the prophecy, it's really you get this sense of like Isaiah's like it's like he's been pulled through time and dimensions sometimes. And so then it's not really that surprising that it almost gets a little you could almost say, at least for us, convoluted when it comes to past, present, future, and his description of events and people, of like, wait, you're talking future tense about this now, or we're talking past tense about something that's in the future, and it's all very I mean, it gets the feeling of someone who's been pulled through space and time a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, and I said this, Isaiah is talking like on the other side of exile, but he
Yeah,
never lived there.
yeah,
He died before that Babylonian invasion,
you're
but
right.
he's able to see things. Well, he saw the child, he saw the child who would be born after the Assyrians and the Babylonians would be laid waste. And so he's able to see again, this is why he's called the eagle-eyed prophet.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
when there's the vision where he goes into the throne room of God, it's almost like that vision never really ends.
Yep.
You know, that transportation that it just gets taken to another place. And yeah, it's amazing. And yeah, just to I mean so hundreds of years in the future,
Yep.
in this case, naming a guy hundreds of years in the future. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So, right, going back now to Isaiah's message, he has to deliver the message that there is a purification coming through judgment, but all for a redeeming purpose, right? So, we know that the servant now has been introduced as part of that plan, right? Bringing justice to the nations. He's right. The Lord takes delight in him, is pleased with him. So the servant has a part to play. Um, Now Isaiah sees this Cyrus, that person's. But when you keep reading Isaiah 49 through 57, more of the servant talk comes up, kind of bringing more definition to him. So I'm going to invite you guys to read that. But then we get to Isaiah chapter 53. Some of you, just by me saying it, are like, whoa, yes, I've heard of that. So the famous Isaiah 53 passage, now we can place it in context because some of us know this. If you look at any uh, commentaries from scholars, biblical scholars, any um, Bible study tools, you're going to see this section labeled the suffering servant. And so we already been introduced to this servant, but now we see that the servant is going to suffer. And so the question we should be asking is, well, why?
Hmm.
But we believe Isaiah 53 will answer it. It will answer the why, and then we can bring that into the context of the bigger picture. Remember, Israel, the nation, they're unclean, right? Remember when Isaiah goes into that throne room with God?
Yeah.
And he gets there, what's the first thing he's able to acknowledge? I'm a man of unclean lips, and I'm among this unclean people.
Hmm.
And so in the vision that he has, again, we talked about this the last time, but he goes through a purification process that cleans him and atones for his sin. And then he's able to accept the invitation to be a messenger to go out to these unclean people. So what we also have to know is that the goal that Yahweh has, again, as we mentioned, is not just punishing them and then bringing them back to their land, but ultimately it is to heal them. We saw this in the other prophets too, in Hosea. The goal is not just to keep people obedient to a God and his laws, but it's how does Yahweh heal them? Like how does he fix them, right? Not just how does he bless them, how does he sustain them, how does he provide for them. Those are all elements of what Yahweh wants to do. But ultimately, is how does he heal this broken humanity? Because it's their brokenness that is causing them to to slip away from him. So here in Isaiah 53, we're going to see that the servant is going to suffer, but in that suffering, it's not just something that happens to the servant, but more so it's something that the servant surrenders with a great purpose. So go ahead. We're going to read the whole chapter. It's really profound. It gets emotional for some people. It's always emotional for me. So go ahead, Ben.
All right. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgressions of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offering and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death, and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors.
And there we go, Isaiah 53. So, so just look at how this chapter gives so much, uh, right? One definition to the servant, but then it tells us that the servant, in the end, is going to his life is going to be used as um, atonement for the people's sins. And so, how does the servant bring justice? Look, how does the servant be, as you mentioned, Ben? Now, how does a person become a covenant, right, between Yahweh and the people? Well, here the servant's life will be sacrificial, and in Isaiah 5, I mean 53:5. Can you just put that one up? Isaiah 53:5, and read. Look, he was pierced for our transgressions; he's crushed for our iniquities, and then the punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. And so, this servant is going to endure a piercing and a crushing and the punishment um, that was that was not for his own unrighteousness, but ultimately for ours, or for the people's, right? What they're hearing, for theirs. And through that, right? Look at this. Through punishment, uh, by him being dealt the punishment, that's what's going to bring peace. And peace has to do with reconciliation, to be at peace with something, to be reconciled. And so now, oh, it sounded nice where, the servant is going to be, he's going to be the covenant for the people. That's beautiful. But here is now we're going to see how. And so, while it is beautiful that this person is the thing that holds the covenant together now between Yahweh and the people, it's now we see how he's going to do that. It's going to be through this sacrificial life. And then verse 10, Ben, can you put 10?
Verse 10, yes.
Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and to cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offering and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. And so it's 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 while we don't know yet what death that will be or how that's going to look, but we do know that it's the Lord that this is part of the Lord's plan, right? It's the Lord's will to do this. But the Lord is going to make his life an offering for sin. And now this is where, okay, in the Torah, in Torah law, there are animals that make atonement for sin. And so they would understand the process of the death of animals dying to account and atone for their sin. They would understand that by now. Here, it's not an animal doing it. There's a servant, and there's not there's not thousands of servants that are going to do this, as there would have been thousands of animals trying to carry the weight of their transgression. Here, it's the servant is his one life will be sufficient for all. And so verse 12 ended, he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors. And so, I mean, that's just a chapter that can be meditated on. And so, here's the theme. It's the suffering servant. There it is. So just some definition, right? Coming to the servant, he's one that is going to suffer in order for for the covenant to be held, and to bring the people in peace with God. So uh, yeah, profound, right?
Yeah.
And so what we'll see is that while this this suffering for sin will be for the nation, right? But it's not just for the nation; it's for the nations. It's not just for Israel. It's going to be for many. So, can we read Isaiah 56 verses 6 through 8, Ben?
Yeah. And foreigners who bind themselves to the Lord to minister to him, to love the name of the Lord, and to be his servants, all who keep the Sabbath without desecrating it, and who hold fast to my covenant, these I will bring to my holy mountain, and give them joy in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and sacrifices will be accepted on my altar, for my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations.
Ah, look at that house of prayer for all the nations.
The
One,
sovereign Lord declares, he who gathers the exiles of Israel, I will gather still others to them besides those already gathered.
now look at that. So, um, while the suffering servant's blood will atone for sin of many, that many is many.
Many.
That many is many. Um, and so it, that verse 6 started foreigners who would bind themselves. In other words, look, foreigners who would come to Yahweh, and who would love him. And so, and those who would be willing to be his servants. Um, and then those who would enter through the covenant of Israel, right? It says here, he's going to bring these people to the holy mountain. And then they'll be able to experience joy in that house. And here we're reading that they'll be able to partake in the offerings and sacrifices, right, that the Lord prescribed for Israel particularly. But here, this picture here is showing that foreigners who lived outside of the covenant, it's describing them partaking in the prescribed things of Israel to show how they can enter and be and live in covenant with Yahweh just as Israel did. So verse 8 is beautiful, right? He who gathers the exiles of Israel. So there's word that the Lord is going to gather them back. I will gather still others to them besides those already gathered. And
Hmm.
this just shows how inclusive is this plan. This makes me think of the parable from Sunday about many being called and
Hmm.
fewer chosen. This invitation, right? This invitation. Isaiah, we didn't read it here, but in Isaiah 25, Isaiah sees on this mountain of the Lord this great feast where nations are able to come, and so Isaiah was able to see that too. And so
Something that you were talking about, they'd be familiar with the concept of like an atonement
sure.
sacrifice, if that's the right word, and here the burnt offerings comes up again. Do you think that anyone would react to what Isaiah's saying and be like, and essentially be like, we have atonement sacrifices.
Yeah,
Why is the animal suddenly not good enough?
yeah, yeah.
And what are they supposed to understand about what's sort of, I don't know, changed? Not changed, but what's different?
Hmm. Sure, it definitely would be different.
Well, yeah.
Like, okay, what happened? But we also know that they, as a nation, for hundreds of years, um, they when they strayed away from right the Torah, we also know that they at times strayed away from certain of the practices. So there could have been several generations that didn't even celebrate the Sabbath,
Hmm.
or you read that they missed the Passover. Like Josiah found found a version of the law, right? That would probably, maybe there's a version in there of the sacrificial system that he couldn't believe how much they had missed. So, um, I think depending what generation we're talking about. I mean, if you're talking about the Northern Kingdom, that's a whole nother story too, right?
Yeah.
Who kings are just full blown out idolatry. They're not honoring Torah, and they're if they are doing sacrifices, they're watered down because they're doing sacrifices of these other gods. So in one sense, I think that they were not experiencing many of the generations were times just lacking all of it. You know, some of them, some I think, if the Sabbath was foreign and some of the whatever version of the Torah was foreign to them, maybe for some they're like, oh, this system's already good. But I think what they actually practice was probably far from what was prescribed. I think there
Right.
was time, like at probably the earlier generations, with Joshua, there probably was a lot more closeness to the sacrificial system. um, but what we do read that when Isaiah opens up, like he's rejecting burnt sacrifices, so he's rejecting you know a lot of what they are doing.
Right. Yeah, because it's almost like you mentioned prescribed, so it makes me think in this metaphor. But like it's like they haven't been taking the medicine that they were given for the problem, but now it's not even like he's not even saying start taking that medicine again. He's like, look, there's a new pill, so to speak,
Yeah. and
coming.
and 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 we get this, right, we get this picture, we get this introduction to the suffering servant, and then it's like, oh, he's announcing new things.
Yeah.
So if they can hear new things, right, forget the old, right, in a sense, forget there's latter times, latter things. Well, this can fall into that category of the latter things. What's in the former? Animal sacrifice to atone for sin and be at peace with God. Well, in this latter time, or these latter things, here's a suffering servant who's going to. And so he's like, I'm announcing it. Here it comes before you. And so in one way, it's like before, right? The the streams, the rivers dried up. Now it's inverted. Now they spring forward in the wilderness here. So it's, in one sense, oh, the principle of sacrifice remained, but what's getting sacrificed is is new.
Mm.
And so after that, we move into the final section, uh, which is section 6, which would be chapters 58 through 66, and we titled these "A Final Purification and a Final Restoration." But we see that in order for there to, right, this purification it's not just it's not just the judgment of the exiles. The suffering servant atones for their sin, which would be the spiritual healing and the spiritual cleansing. So part of the purification process is not just the judgment to straighten them out, but it's through the atonement of their sin, they can be healed. They could be in right standing with God. So we have to put into the package of purification. Yes, judgment and consequence for sin is part of purification, but so is the blood that that atones for their sin. And so, let's see here. Okay, read Isaiah 61, then verses 1 through 3.
The spirit of the sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor.
Now, interesting enough, right? Isaiah 53, the suffering servant, right? His life is a sacrifice unto death. Here, I came across commentary saying, "Hey, take note that while the suffering servant has died in right, has surrendered his life in 53, the Spirit of the Lord is still upon him." And he that this is that this Isaiah 61 would be the servant speaking, because the Spirit of Yahweh is on me. And Yahweh said, I will put my Spirit on him, on the servant. And so now, even though we read that the life of the servant is surrendered in death for the transgression of sinners, in Isaiah 61, the Spirit of the Lord is still upon this servant. And then, if this is the servant speaking, the Lord has anointed the servant to proclaim good news. And so, and to who? To the poor. He's gonna bind up brokenhearted. Again, freedom for the captives, release of darkness for prisoners. Let proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, and to comfort all those who mourn. And
Mm.
so, that verse 2, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, literally is connected to uh, the year of Jubilee that we read about in Leviticus, I believe 25. You would have to check the chapter. That's off the top of my head. Points to me if I got that right.
Yeah, for real.
Someone check Leviticus 25 for year of Jubilee. I don't know. And then let us know in the chat if I got that right. But doesn't that sound familiar? Yes. Look, Pastor Tanya put that. Sounds very familiar. And so, look, if this is the servant of the Lord here in Isaiah 61, it's saying the servant is saying the Spirit of the Lord's upon him. And look, he's anointed for the good news. This is where we get the word gospel. We get the word gospel from the word good news. And here, we try not to do this too much, but Jesus, when he begins his ministry, he goes into a synagogue on the Sabbath day, and he's handed a scroll, and he reads from Isaiah. He opens it up, and he reads this. And he closes it up and says, today this is fulfilled in your hearing, and drops the scroll. And so we read this, and again, here's one of the passages that we're like, oh, that's a New Testament passage. This is something that Jesus says. But as we said last week, a lot of New Testament passages that we read are either many. There's like Isaiah's quoted over 60 times, and he's all over the lips of Jesus. And here's one of them where he literally opens up to this portion of scripture, and then he says,
it's so familiar that I even, like, when I said the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is, when I added upon me there as I started to read it, that's how it's often written when Jesus quotes from it. So I'm so used to that.
And so here he's proclaiming, look, the servant at the proclamation of this good news, he's proclaiming the year of the Lord's favor. What was the year of the Lord's favor? Jubilee. Did anyone check me on that? Fact check, Pastor?
I checked you on that. You were right. It is Leviticus 25.
Okay, good. I get some points.
Yeah, no, I'm impressed.
And so, well, I'm the one who taught Leviticus. Remember?
Yes, yeah. So, if any of us would have gotten that right, it should have been you.
But what was the year of Jubilee? It was the year of release. It's the release of those who are sold into debt slavery. It's a year of freedom. It's a 50th year of freedom. And so what Isaiah is saying, that the Spirit of the Lord is on the servant who is going to, he's anointed for this task. So he is a Mashiach, right? He's set apart for this task, and he's going to proclaim the good news, or in Greek New Testament times, the gospel. And he is going to usher in the Jubilee, like the year release. And then we get all these amazing descriptions of freedom to captives, release from the darkness. Um, oh, yeah, and he's going to provide for those who grieve in Zion to bestow upon them a crown of beauty for ashes, like an oil of joy instead of mourning, and this garment of praise instead of the spirit of despair. And this is all who the servant is bringing this in. And then look, now they're called oaks of righteousness. I mean, for what we know, the children of Israel and the nations, right? Unrighteous, right? Very few people where we'll read like, and this person was either righteous before the Lord, or it's very few people. But if as a whole, right, and the record of Israel and the nations and humanity is unrighteousness. But what the servant of the Lord will bring and do, it will create. Look, there's an exchange of garments. They're getting they're getting dressed from mourning into a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. So from despair, now they could be dressed in a garment of praise, because, right, we talked about, like, for the generation that sat in exile, this hopelessness, this despair, right, or for anyone to get to that place of despair in in through this servant of the Lord, a garment of praise that exchange is now possible from despair to this praise.
I don't know whether or not it's something that it's meant to invoke, but the idea of God exchanging garments makes me think of very early in our journey through the Old Testament
Oh yeah.
of Adam and Eve coming out of the garden and the clothes they made for themselves, and God sacrificing an animal
Mm-hmm.
to create clothing that was sufficient for them.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I think that's a beautiful thing that you saw there. The the servant is the sacrifice, and then now the servant, or through the servant, they're able to be called righteousness, but they're able to be given new garments,
Hmm.
and and the garments are praise. So now look at the posture. Now look at the experience. You know, it's not just it's not just about bringing them back to a place, but it's about bringing them to a state of being within themselves, where praise really is coming forth from them. Like something has happened internally. It's not just a surrounding that changes. Sure, the surrounding changes from exile, but this servant here is definitely doing something through generations, right? Like, um, so that brings us to this key theme. I mean, if that doesn't sound like good news to you, then I don't know what it sounds like. But that's that key. There we highlighted this passage of the power of the good news. So in one sense, that's the power of the gospel. There it is.
Yeah.
And so this good news, we'll see, is ultimately, um, and it's fast. Like as we read stuff and Isaiah sees stuff and describes stuff, each thing is like giving way to the next thing, right? Like it's a plan. Like again, go back to part one. All right, judgment has to come, and they got to get chopped down. Oh, but there's a branch I saw. Then it's like, okay, yeah, there was a stump, but there a seed remained, and then from there, uh, everything starts to grow from there. Everything starts to progress from that point. And so now we got this good news. There's an opportunity for the nations to come, right? And but how Isaiah is going to end, it's going to have a climax. It's going to end in the climax. And so we should have been feeling this, right, from 40, that comfort. There's the big turnaround. Start to feeling this ascent, so to say. Isaiah 65, which is the second to last chapter. Ben, if you could read 17 to 19, look what's being seen now.
See, I will create new heavens and a new earth. The former things will not be remembered, nor will they come to mind, but be glad and rejoice forever in what I will create. For I will create Jerusalem to be a delight and its people a joy. I will rejoice over Jerusalem and take delight in my people. The sound of weeping and of crying will be heard in it no more.
Yeah, just keep that slide up there, Ben, for a little
Yeah.
bit. So our first look at this. Isaiah opened up, and the first theme, the key theme that we highlighted was the New Jerusalem. That's the first key theme that we brought about in Isaiah. Now, as Isaiah is coming to a close, we see, for I will create Jerusalem to be a delight. So Jerusalem gets that 2.0, right? Like it gets elevated. But here he's seen new heavens and new earth, and that together is coming. It's coming together with this talk of this new Jerusalem that's also created. So as we said when we spoke about the new Jerusalem that Isaiah saw earlier in this scroll, it is this heaven touching earth moment. And here he says that the heavens are made new, the earth is being made new. And then again, he uses the language, the former things are not even going to be remembered. They're not even going to come to mind. But here, look, again, right? They got to have praise with the new garments. Here in verse 18, they get to be glad and rejoice forever.
Yeah.
In this new heaven and new earth.
And talk about early in our journey. This is verse 1 of the Bible.
Yeah,
God
verse 1
created
it
the
is.
heavens and the earth, and that it's going back to. And now it's a new heavens and a new earth. It's a whole new. It's referencing that original creation idea.
Yeah. And so,
It's amazing.
right, we talked about how the Isaiah is divided in these two big halves, the former things and the latter things. And it's because Isaiah is doing it himself. No one, a scholar, a biblical scholar didn't make that up. Like this is Isaiah together with the Lord using him to speak and showing him things. Isaiah now sees it. So what's a former thing? This is interesting, right, Ben? What you and I are living in right now. This is the key theme, right? The new heavens and the new earth. What we are living in right now, Isaiah is calling it former.
Hmm.
Like it's a former thing, and he's speaking to us that it won't be remembered, because there is going to come a time where new heavens and new earth will be made over and come together on this holy mountain in Jerusalem, and we know that that's a new Jerusalem. And so man, Isaiah has seen some things and some beautiful things and hopeful things, right? If we talk about we know in every kind of sense that right, that there has been not just decline in humanity, but as we have, like, going back to Genesis 1, as you mentioned, the beginning of Genesis is that was all new at one point. Humanity was new at one point. Humanity was in the image of God, and humanity departs from that image. Yahweh, from the beginning, is faithful to the redemptive processes of those humans. But right, as the story would work out, humanity would go on this decline, and the truth is that everything would suffer as humanity would continue to be broken down. Like as humanity would break, and as the humans would, that everything would suffer in that process with it. And then I would say in many ways, the earth itself, the physical earth, has suffered at the hands of humans.
Right.
And there's again, we don't try to do this much, but there's a New Testament verse that Paul says that creation is in groaning waiting for the sons and daughters of God to be revealed again. Like that creation is awaiting for for uh for the humans to, obviously through our restoration process, through all of what Isaiah sees, for that to happen, so that then the earth could have good stewards, you know? And so
Mm.
there will be, according to Isaiah's words, the heavens and the earth will be remade, Jerusalem will be remade, and humanity will have this rebirthing and restoration and cleansing. Can you imagine when all of those things come together, what that would look like? Most of us, I think we picture, and I know I've done this for years, like, okay, die and just hopefully you make it to heaven, right? And then as you grow up, no, I really love Jesus. I put my faith in him. And so it's like in our minds, because our minds can't see so far, it's like the goal is that when we pass, we enter into eternity. And then eternity is just like this. I don't even know what that is, but it kind of in our minds, it ends. It's an
Right, it's
end.
unfathomable, really.
Yes. Yeah. Like the brain can't comprehend it. And so I'm not pretending that I know what's beyond that, right? But what I'm saying is that our minds, it ends because it's unfathomable, right? Like like I can't imagine what that. However, I think what we are, when we get to passages like this, um, I I think it can only mean that it's a new heaven, a new earth, and a new Jerusalem, and a humanity remade in new garments. That's not the ending of anything. It's
Right.
only it's only an incredible beginning that we cannot imagine, but at least know it's the beginning of something glorious.
Yeah, when it gets me every time when I read the passage where the disciples are asking Jesus about the end times,
Yeah,
and he talks about like wars and he talks about a bunch of bad stuff that's normal Earth stuff,
yeah,
and he said he calls them the beginnings of birth pains,
thanks. Yeah,
and that like despite that the fact that he's talking about these terrible things, like that always just fills me with like this sense of like joy
mm,
of what a wonderful image that is of like birth is this painful process for the
mhm,
mother, for the child,
yeah,
but it's a beginning. It's such a short period
yeah,
of what is in the grand scheme of things, like what comes right after that is just amazing and beautiful.
yeah,
And a baby being placed in the arms of its mother and its
oh
father,
yeah,
and it's like it's just beautiful.
yep,
And so like yeah, it's hard to fathom. It's maybe impossible to fathom eternity right now. um but I think that you can even think about eternity mathematically, and you
mm,
can start to get an idea of why a lot of these things are true, that anything in the face of the infinite becomes infinitely small. It becomes infinitely short.
that's
Um,
right.
and I think that in that sense, we can imagine it a little bit. We can at
Yeah,
least see the logic, if you will, of it, if that makes sense.
yeah, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Ben. And so, how is Isaiah gonna end? Well, Isaiah 66, which is the final chapter, and we made it.
We made it.
Is a verse that's well known to us. I don't have it to put up, but I'll just mention it. Um, Isaiah 66, which is this is the final chapter in it. It says, "This is what the Lord says. This is what Yahweh says: Heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. Where is the house you will build for me? Where will my resting place be?" All right,
Hmm.
and whoa, I invite you to read Isaiah 66. But when you get there, right, Isaiah has said so much. And I could imagine those reading, let's say if you lived during the time of Isaiah and if you heard these oracles, or if you didn't hear it from him, but it was you read it post exile as it was communicated or preserved in the scroll or through oral tradition, and you heard it, and you're hearing all these things, right, from Isaiah about a new Jerusalem. There's a branch, there's the seed, there's a stump, there's a sign that Yahweh's going to give, and it's a child, and the coming down of all the nations, and that there's going to be a way prepared out in the wilderness, and that there's this servant of the Lord, and now he suffers. There's good news. It's so much, right? Because the content is so large. Isaiah has said so much. You could imagine someone saying, "Is that possible?" Like, is all of that really possible? And I think depending where you're at, right? If you're pre the exile, pre the Syrian invasion, or any of the invasions and exiles, probably didn't even pay no mind to it. I'm not sure how many people actually heard it. I don't know when Isaiah's scroll got written down and that it became popular and it's being read or being communicated. But depending probably where you're at, after his words, probably you had a different, you know, care for it or lack of care for it or what. But I can't imagine that whoever finally hears it, like, is all of that possible? Like, come on, you captain, bro. Right? That's like Isaiah. And so Isaiah, interesting enough, in the final chapter, um, in verse 8, it poses the question itself. In verse 8, I don't have it for you guys as well, but I'll read a portion of it. In verse 8, it says, who has ever heard of such things? And really, no one has. And it's, who has ever seen things like this? No one at this point has. And then the question gets asked, can a country be born in a day or a nation be brought forth in a moment? And then it says, yet no sooner is Zion in labor than she gives birth to her children. And what the question, right, the question is posed, is this possible? Can this really happen? Like, I guess the metaphor is, can this happen in a day? Can this happen? And we're supposed to be left with, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's possible.
I didn't even know that verse was there when I was bringing up the child, the birth and everything. I mean, even down in verse 12, he says, "And you will be nursed, you will be carried on the hip and rocked back and forth on the knees."
Yeah. Isaiah's legit.
Yeah.
But let's read the last verses here of Isaiah 22 and 23.
All right. As the new heavens and the new earth that I make will endure before me, declares the Lord, so will your name and descendants endure. From one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, all mankind will come and bow down before me, says the Lord.
Look at that. And so what's interesting, how Isaiah comes to an end, is that he brings up here. Can you put that verse up just again? Oh no, it's fine. You don't have to. I got it right here in front of me. No, please put it up, Ben. I'm sorry. There we go. Oh, you got it. Okay. It says, from new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, all mankind will come and bow down before me, says the Lord. Now, if you remember, if you go back to our last, when we did part 1, what's interesting is that Isaiah opened up with God, right? Because of their breaking of the covenant, he in Isaiah 1, it speaks about him rejecting their sacrifices, burnt offerings, and even rejecting their celebrations of the new moon festivals and Sabbaths. He's not receiving it. Why? Because they're out of covenant. And so in that sense, it's just religious, and it's a burden to him, it's a weight to him. And so he doesn't want this act of worship because they truly are not in worship. But here, as this new has come, we'll say, then Isaiah is going to conclude that from one new moon to the other, from one Sabbath to another. All mankind will come and bow down before me, says the Lord. And so it's kind of this beautiful um, way of these two bookends where your practices were rejected because um, your hearts were apart from me. But now that this this newness has overtaken you in all things, now the practice is now received. And so what got rejected, the religious activity of these festivals and these Sabbaths, now is received because they have been made new. So yeah, we that's it. Isaiah ends, and that's it.
Wow. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure.
Our, quick overview now that we saw what we got through in Isaiah part 1, but this is all of the key themes that came out of Isaiah. There's quite a few. But the New Jerusalem, the branch of the Lord, the holy seed and stump, the child Emmanuel, the bright morning star, the way prepared, the servant of the Lord, the suffering servant, the power of the good news, and the new heavens and new earth, for a total of 10 key themes, which is a good number, I think.
Yep. Yep.
So, wow. Yeah. Thank you so much, Pastor,
You're
for
welcome. Thank you for hosting and being on the journey.
and thank everyone here for being here with us for this journey and for sticking through with us as we sort of had to take 2 episodes for Isaiah. But I'm really glad that we did because there's a lot to get into. I wish we could. I mean, we probably at some point could do a whole Isaiah study.
Right? Yeah.
But that's true for really any of the books. Even some of the books that have 3 chapters, and we'll get into some of those next time.
Yeah.
I bet you could spend a lot of time in them if you wanted to.
Yeah. And if let's say someone enjoyed, I enjoyed, a book being this long and having so much content. Oh, don't worry, you got some big hitters still to come. There's 2 more major prophets, which again, major because of how much content, and there'll be a lot to share there. So I'm excited for those to come too.
Yeah. But next time, just so everyone knows where we're headed next, I like to do this because I know there's some people that are reading ahead of us, which is great. But so the next, we're actually going to be a lot. This will be a quicker read for you guys. We're going to get into Nahum and Zephaniah, collectively between them only having 6 chapters. But I'm sure we're going to have a lot of talked about. But what it means is that it won't take you guys long to read through both Nahum and Zephaniah before next Bible study. So I'm hoping some of you do that.
Awesome.
So yeah, so a few announcements just coming up this Thursday. Like every Thursday night is Encounter Nights. It's a youth-led service. Everyone's welcome. It starts at 7:30. Doors open at 7:15. Well, the
Sanctuary doors.
sanctuary doors open. The church doors open at 7, I believe. And then on Friday the 29th, which is this Friday, we have a TDP men's fellowship at the church. So please come join us. You don't have to have been at the church for very long or even at all. If you're a man and you need some fellowship and you want to come hang out with us and talk scripture, talk to me, and worship. I think we're doing some worship. So please show up. And likewise, also this Friday is Deeply Rooted Women's Ministry. That's not at the church. That text this number on the screen, and you can to RSVP, and you can get the location that way. I think that's pretty much everything. Again, thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. And yeah, I mean, just thank you guys. And I'm really excited to have been through Isaiah. Really excited to get into Nahum and Zephaniah, right? Isaiah's one that we hear. We know Isaiah. We hear from Isaiah a lot. It's really cool to dive into those books that we hear about a lot, but I haven't necessarily gotten into before.
Mm-hmm.
It's also really cool to be getting into the books that you don't hear about.
Oh yeah,
you hear about Nahum and Zephaniah all that much. And
I can imagine someone said, Nahum who?
yeah, yeah, I I remember I saw a pastor that was like joking about like, can you imagine getting to heaven and there's a guy walks up like, oh, did you like my book? Do you like the Habakkuk? And you'd be like, who Habakkuk? So, but yeah, so it's great to be getting through all of this. Anyway, thank you all again. Have a great night. Read Nahum and Zephaniah. It's going to be quick. Listen to them. You can listen to them. Take you just a few minutes. So please do that. Maybe do it once or twice. Who knows? So yeah, but thank you all. Have a great night, and we'll see you 2 weeks from now. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.